On this episode, two medical mysteries that defied the experts.
Her eyes kind of rolled into the back of her head, and she completely stopped breathing.
We started to both wonder, will she be normal?
From the moment Kylie Monica is born, doctors are baffled by her bizarre deformities, forcing her parents to take matters into their own hands.
She had to be fixed. I had to fix her. I couldn't let her go.
Then, when 28-year-old Robin Akbar develops intense asthma-like symptoms, she has no idea it will spiral into a battle to the last breath.
She was always coughing, always grabbing her chest and not being able to breathe.
I knew if I did not find what was going on with me, I was going to die.
When illness strikes, we look to doctors to give us answers. But what if they can't? For these unlucky patients, diagnosis is a mystery.
In the spring of 1998, Heather and Joe Monica were happier than they'd ever been. The couple had just moved into a new home in Rumson, New Jersey, and they dreamed of filling it up with children.
Joe and I had always talked about wanting to have 10 kids. We had 3 kids at the time. Joe had 2 kids from his first marriage who only lived blocks away and would come to the house every day after school.
Our house was a real circus. I mean, it was very hectic, but we would have it no other way.
My daily routine was getting up, making breakfast and laundry and the dog and diapers nonstop. I was a mom. That's all I ever wanted to be.
I worked full-time during the day, doing private security from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And at 4 p.m. to midnight, I worked my shift at the police force. But the highlight of each day was to come home for lunch and see Heather and the kids.
Things were moving along beautifully. The only plans Joe and I had for the future was more kids.
And that July, their wish comes true when Heather learns she's pregnant with a little girl.
I wanted the name to be beautiful, and when I was looking up names, I found out that the Aborigine word for beautiful is Kylie.
Everything was good. Her OBGYN visits were perfect. We were just waiting for the big day.
And on April 23rd, 1999, the moment finally arrives.
I was in labor for a good 18 hours. As soon as she came out, we knew there was something wrong. They just whisked her away. It was just silence, and it was scary. I had already had 3 kids, so labor and delivery was normal to me. So to have a situation where what I had been familiar with was different and that there was things that were wrong was very unsettling.
Minutes later, the doctor returns to give the worried parents an update.
She had an extraordinarily low birth weight, only 5 pounds for a full-term baby.
He said, are there any type of birth defects in your family? And we both looked at each other and said, absolutely not.
When he explained to us that she had a deformity to her right thumb, there was no bone in it.
And he said she has a cleft palate as well. The roof of her mouth isn't there. We were both worried and very upset. We had had 3 prior births that were uneventful, and nothing like this had ever crossed our paths.
We were absolutely stunned and overwhelmed. I didn't know what all of this together meant.
They were still observing her at that point, but they were going to start some genetic testing for what they call the 22 deletion test.
22 deletion syndrome is a genetic disorder in which a small piece of chromosome 22 is missing. It can result in developmental delays, small stature, defects in the palate, and in the worst cases, life-threatening heart conditions.
Our jaws both dropped. And now we started to both wonder, will she be normal? Is she normal? Is she going to be able to, function on her own?
When I finally got to hold Kylie, it was scary, and I'd never been afraid of my child before. It was different. She was so tiny. She was so tiny, and I was so worried. I don't think there's a word in the English language that could have described how anxious we were for the results to come back.
The testing was negative. She didn't have the 22 chromosome deletion.
I didn't know whether I wanted to say, yippee, she has no 22 deletion, or, my God, what's wrong with my child? If it's not that, then what on earth could it possibly be?
Back to square one, the medical team begins performing a round of tests, while Heather and Kylie begin to bond. But nothing could have prepared her for what happens next.
I started to feed her, and then she got very blue, and her eyes kind of rolled into the back of her head, and she completely stopped breathing. I just started screaming, "Someone help me, please, my daughter's not breathing." It felt like an infinity before there was a nurse in the room, and they grabbed her and they ran. I have never been so scared in my entire life.
And now we started to both wonder, is there more to this that we know about? We really thought the worst. We had no idea what was going on.
They decided that they were going to take her to their neonatal intensive care unit. It's impossible to describe what I saw when I walked into that room. This tiny, fragile baby, connected to more machines than I knew ever existed. She was on oxygen. I couldn't even find my baby underneath that mess, and it was horrifying.
At that point, we both looked at each other and wondered if Kylie was even going to make it through the night. And it floored both of us.
In a race against time, the doctors begin performing test after test, hoping to find some clue. But with each passing day, they're no closer to an answer. And the family begins to wonder how much more their little girl can take.
Kylie struggled for every breath. She would gasp. It was like watching a fish breathe out of water. All of my instincts were to grab her and scoop her up and run home with her, and everything would be okay. And I couldn't even touch her. I was lost. I felt so out of place. My job as her mother didn't exist.
Worse still, the burden of juggling hospital visits with a full house begins to take its toll on the Monicas.
I needed to work. Heather needed to take care of the other children. So it made it even that more difficult because we couldn't be with her as often as we wanted to.
All I wanted to do was be by her side. I just wanted to sit next to her and watch every breath she took, because every single one counted. But we just couldn't let one tragedy create another. I had a family at home that needed me as much as the baby in the hospital needed me.
Every day we didn't know if we were going to get a phone call or not saying that Kylie didn't make it through the night. She was so unstable and she was just rapidly declining.
I was absolutely terrified that my daughter was going to die.
In the fall of 1996, 19-year-old Robin Akbar was living with her boyfriend in Lafayette, Louisiana. Young and in love, they were eagerly looking forward to the birth of their first child.
David was born on September 20th, 1996, and it was the most indescribable experience. It was good to watch him grow and just develop as a baby.
But with no family nearby to help out, the strain of so much responsibility weighs heavily on the young couple.
We did eventually part ways, still keeping David in our full focus. I wanted nothing more than the best for David. His father was in the picture somewhat, but not enough to know David inside and out the way I did.
My mom and I, we were like best friends. She did the best job that she could because my dad wasn't around.
I had a job at a medical staffing agency where I was working full-time plus some, probably at that point 60 to 70 hours a week, so that he could go to the better schools and could have the better things.
But despite her very busy schedule, Robin manages to stay fit.
I really prided myself in Being size 2, I love to run. I ran between 15 to 17 miles a week.
Robin feels extraordinarily lucky to have such a solid handle on her life. Little does she know, everything is about to change forever, one morning in April of 2005.
I was on one of my runs, and then I lost my breath for a second. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't catch my breath. I almost felt like I was drowning. I knew that something was awfully wrong.
A month ago, Kylie Monica was born weighing only 5 pounds and exhibiting a bizarre set of birth defects, a cleft palate and a deformed thumb. Since then, her distraught parents Joe and Heather have watched their tiny daughter struggle for every breath.
We really felt like we needed to prepare ourselves for a child to be lost. We thought we were going to lose Kylie that first month of life.
After reviewing scores of tests, the medical team now believes they know what's causing her breathing problems.
The doctor explained that Kylie had an atrial septal defect, an ASD.
An atrial septal defect, or ASD, is a congenital condition commonly known as a hole in the heart. If it's not surgically repaired, the condition can be fatal.
That was just so scary because that just took her whole health to a different level for me, and I was terrified. She couldn't have the heart surgery till she was at least 10 pounds. She was now down to 4 pounds. The doctors explained to us that we could do the same things for her at home that they were doing in the hospital, and I was more than willing to do anything to get her home. So Kylie was discharged. If I thought it was hard juggling the kids at home and trips to the hospital, it was very difficult having her home. The living room actually ended up being converted into Kylie's hospital room.
It was stressful with the other children being around because we were always afraid that they would touch something they shouldn't, or that they might pull a tube or pull one of her IVs or something that was attached to her.
Every day Kylie got a little sicker, and when she would try and breathe, it just sounded like she was sucking on a sponge. The doctors just couldn't do anything for her. She just continued to deteriorate right before our eyes.
We didn't know that Kylie would ever be strong enough for the surgery, although they did say she wouldn't be able to survive without it. Our question was, would she survive leading to it? Because she just wasn't getting there.
Kylie had an apnea monitor, and that would alarm us if there was any lack of breathing, and I would find myself counting her breaths. I thought that the only reason she was taking another breath was because in my head and in my heart, I was counting another number for her. So I felt like I had to keep her going because I thought she was going to die.
Then, one afternoon, when Kylie is 10 months old, Heather's worst fears suddenly seem to be coming true.
Kylie's apnea monitor went off and just would not stop. The heart rate was going up, and she was having such difficulty breathing. It was frightening. I just knew I had to get her to the ER.
Panicked, Heather rushes her to the hospital, calling Joe on the way. 15 minutes later, Kylie is admitted to the pediatric intensive care unit. But despite frantic efforts, the medical team can't stabilize her breathing.
So they actually had to take her to the operating room to be able to do an emergency tracheostomy. They decided that she needed additional respiratory support. I had an absolute meltdown. I cried and prayed like I had never prayed before in my life.
And the doctor had come back to Heather and I, and we could see that he had a worried look on his face. We had asked, why is this happening? And he said she was in congestive heart failure.
Congestive heart failure is a sometimes fatal condition in which the heart isn't able to pump enough blood to the body's organs. It can lead to a buildup of fluid in the lungs, which makes it impossible to breathe.
He didn't feel confident that tracheing her was going to give her the respiratory support that she needed, and we should probably get her baptized as quick as possible. I couldn't handle that. Somebody isn't supposed to tell you that your child's probably going to die tonight. I knew that if I lost her, or when I lost her, that I was not going to be a functioning human being. But I was convinced Kylie was going to die that night. I stayed in the hospital and I held her little hand all night long. I couldn't let her go. She had to be fixed. I had to fix her. She deserved so much more than to be lying in that bed.
Through the night, Heather sits vigil beside Kylie's bed. And in the morning, her prayers appear to be answered.
The doctor came back and said that it was looking a lot better, that the lungs were a lot clearer. I was euphoric.
They just didn't believe that a child born with all these defects would not have some type of syndrome connected with it. And they said they needed to do more genetic testing.
That day we saw a geneticist. She looked at Kylie, she looked at Kylie's history, and she said, I think this isn't necessarily about Kylie's heart pumping the blood through her body wrong, but I think this is actually an issue with the blood. So I really think that you guys need to go see this team of hematologists in Long Island.
That afternoon, Kylie is transported by ambulance 70 miles north to Cohen Children's Medical Center in New Hyde Park, New York, where hematologist Dr. Jeffrey Lipton is waiting to take over her case.
The idea was to look for some sort of common thread that could put her symptoms together. The next thing we needed to do was a bone marrow biopsy to see if she was unable to make certain blood cells. When I looked at the bone marrow, there were no red blood cells. With a constellation of physical abnormalities and a bone marrow that was unable to make red blood cells. This was a classic case of Diamond-Blackfan anemia.
Diamond-Blackfan anemia is a genetic disorder of the bone marrow. In healthy individuals, bone marrow produces red blood cells, which carry oxygen to the body's organs. But in patients like Kylie, a genetic mutation causes the bone marrow to malfunction, which leads to a severe deficiency of red blood cells.
Anemia is just not having enough red blood cells in your body to pick up oxygen in the lungs and deliver it to the tissue. Every tissue in your body requires oxygen to live.
And it was an emotional moment for both of us. We had an answer, but we were both a little confused. We didn't know what that meant.
Joe and Heather listen as Dr. Lipton explains that Kylie's defects, though not present in every DBA patient, are all a direct result of the disease.
Some patients with Diamond-Blackfan anemia, besides being anemic, have a variety of birth defects. These birth defects are the consequence of the same mutation that causes the anemia.
In addition, the genetic abnormality also led to the hole in her heart, making it extremely difficult for Kylie to breathe.
Kylie's severe anemia contributed to her inability to breathe normally. The lungs weren't being oxygenated and were not functioning normally. The failure to treat a profoundly anemic baby will result in death.
It just hit us like a ton of bricks. Joe and I just looked at each other and just couldn't believe it.
Now we were able to put a finger on it, but what does that mean? Does that mean that you can fix it? Does it mean that you can heal it, treat it? We needed answers.
The first thing was to get her on a regular transfusion program with red blood cells every 3 weeks.
Over the next 18 months, Kylie receives blood transfusions that keep her alive. And finally, she's strong enough to undergo corrective surgeries for her thumb, cleft palate, and heart. Robin Akbar, a 28-year-old single mother, has always been physically fit, running up to 17 miles a week. But now, during a seemingly ordinary run, she's struck by a frightening feeling she has never had before.
All of a sudden, I couldn't catch my breath. I couldn't get in enough oxygen. So I rushed to the doctor's office. The doctor did a thorough exam, and it was his idea that I had adult onset asthma. The doctor prescribed me a steroid inhaler.
The physician assures Robin that it won't take long for her asthma symptoms to subside. But over the next 3 months, they just get worse.
She was always coughing, always grabbing her chest and not being able to breathe.
And I just thought I could use the medication and it would go away, but it didn't happen. I felt like I was suffocating almost in my own body, and that was terrifying.
Exercise is out of the question, and even daily activities have become difficult.
Not being able to be physically active was very frustrating, but I had no choice.
And the asthma is affecting Robin's life in another troubling way. The side effects from the steroid inhaler are transforming her body.
I started to notice weight gain almost immediately. I went from a size 2 to a size 18 from the steroid usage, and there was nothing I could do about it. I was very depressed at that point.
Robin does the best she can to adapt to the restrictions in her life. But one morning, she's taken aback by a painful new sensation.
I just had the sinus pressure, a headache. I had had sinus infections in the past, but nothing like this.
For almost 2 weeks, Robin tries countless over-the-counter remedies, but nothing helps. Desperate for relief, she makes an appointment with an ear, nose, and throat specialist.
When I first went to Dr. Foreman, I was hoping that he would find something.
When she initially came in, her sinuses were exceptionally inflamed, so we knew that she had a serious problem.
He told me I was just full of nasal polyps in every sinus cavity.
Nasal polyps are non-cancerous growths in the nose or sinuses. They can block the area and create difficulty breathing.
He recommended endoscopic sinus surgery, which he felt would improve my breathing.
The polyps were all removed. We felt that, surgically speaking, we had performed a good operation.
After the surgery was over, I felt like my airways and my sinuses were open. It was great.
For the first time in 6 months, Robin feels confident that things are looking up. But just a few days later, an all too familiar sensation sets in.
I felt like I could not make my lungs expand. What good is it being able to breathe through your nose if you can't make your lungs work?
By the spring, 2 years after the asthma first appeared, Robin is at an all-time low. She feels winded just standing up, and her whole body aches.
I was doing the best that I could, but some days I couldn't make it to work, and I did have to call in sick.
But then it was a sick day after another sick day.
People in the office were noticing my being late for work, my continual missing work, and I was afraid they would let me go.
Just when Robin thinks it can't get any worse, a terrifying new symptom surfaces.
I was coughing and coughing, and my chest hurt. And with one of the coughs, there was blood in my hand. I was very scared, and I really didn't know what to do. My body was deteriorating, and I knew if I did not find what was going on with me, I was going to die.
And in October of 2001, after nearly 20 months in the hospital, the moment Joe and Heather have yearned for arrives. Kylie goes home for good.
When Kylie finally came home, it was definitely one of the happier moments in our lives. It was like her being born all over again.
But there is still one more hurdle for 2.5-year-old Kylie to overcome.
With the transfusions being so frequent, the side effects of transfusion started to become real.
Kylie's blood transfusions are leaving her with a buildup of dangerous, even deadly amounts of iron in her body. Her only hope is a bone marrow transplant, which can generate red blood cells.
It became abundantly clear very quickly that we had to do the transplant as soon as possible.
Because of the severity of her particular case, Dr. Lipton said the only way that he would even consider doing a bone marrow transplant on Kylie would be if it was an exact match sibling only. Heather and I were tested. We were not matches. All the children were tested. They didn't match Kylie. So at that point, we were very upset. Without the transplant, we didn't know if she was going to actually survive.
Over the last 2 years, Robin Akbar has endured asthma so debilitating that surgery and medication have barely made a difference. Now, a disturbing new symptom has left her coughing up blood, and she's forced to drive herself to the closest ER.
I got very, very scared. I thought, okay, something is going on in my lungs. I knew that I needed help.
Over the next 3 days, Robin undergoes a battery of tests, but they reveal nothing out of the ordinary.
The doctor said, well, sometimes, those things can come along with asthma. And I said, okay, well, if it's just asthma, why do I have the fatigue? Why do I have the body aches? The doctor had no answers. I felt like I had nowhere to turn to.
Robin is once again sent home with even more powerful steroids, and they help for a few weeks. But then, her condition begins to spiral out of control.
As my mom became more unable to do things around the house, I had to step up. I swept the bathrooms, I did the laundry, I cooked dinner.
I was 30 years old, and my body felt like that of a 90-year-old woman.
It got to the point where she would ask me to put her toothpaste on her toothbrush and leave it by the sink for her.
I did at that point feel some sense of guilt because I felt like I was robbing his childhood, but I needed his help at that point. I had no choice.
Then, one gray December morning, after suffering for 2.5 years, Robin finds herself facing her worst nightmare.
It got back to my supervisor that I couldn't perform my duties. They asked me not to come back to work. I was devastated.
It was a big shock to me because I was thinking to myself, how are we going to live? How are we going to have TV and the lights? And it just dawned on me that we weren't going to be able to.
I was very concerned because I had this illness. I could not go and look for another job. So then was the question, how am I going to provide for my son? I remember thinking, this is probably going to be my last Christmas with my son, so I better make the best of it.
Unemployed and with no savings, Robin can't pay her rent or put food on the table.
I did have to make the choice to let him live with his father. It was very, very heartbreaking. I had conveyed to David that, again, this is just temporary and, we were going to get back together.
It was a very sad day. I just had to look up. Had to look up to the future.
The next 3 months are agonizing for Robin as she's evicted from her home and is forced to sell everything she owns.
And one day, people just came in and took out all the things that I had worked for so many years to accumulate. And it was gone. And I had nothing but a few clothes and a couple of keepsake pictures that I kept.
Penniless and with no family to turn to, Robin's choices are bleak. And in desperation, she moves into a homeless shelter.
I looked around and I thought, I'm educated and now I'm in a shelter. And, what am I doing here?
2 months later, at the end of her rope, Robin reaches out to an old friend for guidance, Dolores Guidry.
Robin and I met for the first time about 7 years ago at a local church where we both attended. The Robin that I saw on my couch was a shell of the person that I knew before.
And I just told her, I'm not doing well and I'm pretty scared.
My heart just went out to Robin. She had lost everything.
Dolores did, at that point, tell me that I could live with her.
Horrified at Robin's decline, Dolores begins searching for a doctor who can help her friend.
We found another specialist. We went to the doctor, and he was shocked at her deterioration.
When I got there, the doctor ordered a barrage of blood work, and he ordered a CAT scan of my chest.
The doctor told us that he found nodules on Robin's lungs. The doctor said that it could be cancer.
I think at that point, I was kind of numb. It was just kind of a knot in my throat.
Robin and I had been preparing for bad news, but when we heard the word cancer, it was devastating. Robin felt like that was it, that she would have to say goodbye to her son, David.
And I just sat there, choking back the tears. Now I had to tell my son that I was possibly gonna die.
Since the day she was born, Kylie Monica faced terrifying health problems. In addition to suffering from strange defects, her heart was failing. But once Dr. Jeffrey Lipton identified the rare condition causing all of the complications, Diamond-Blackfan anemia, the Monica family thought they were in the clear. Until now. Kylie's in desperate need of a bone marrow transplant from a sibling, but none of them are a match.
So then it was up to Heather and I to decide how we were going to proceed with this. Were we going to have more children and try to find a match for Kylie?
Here was a perfect opportunity that our desire to have more children was actually imperative. That if we were going to save our daughter, we needed to have a baby to match her.
Then Heather became pregnant with Jordan. And Jordan is our little girl who was Kylie's match.
We had a very successful transplant that enabled Kylie for the first time to make red blood cells. This, for us, was a very, very happy moment.
My sister Jordan gave me her blood so I can live. I'm very thankful for her because she saved my life.
She was definitely well on her way to being a normal child.
Kylie's prognosis is really quite good. Her anemia is cured.
The Monicas are thrilled with Kylie's miraculous recovery. But now, they can't help but wonder why it took so long to identify the deadly disease.
Diamond-Blackfan anemia is incredibly rare. By our best estimates, only 20 to 50 children are born each year in the United States and Canada with Diamond-Blackfan anemia. In Kylie's situation, she had so much going on. With her birth defects, the focus was really on solving those problems and not necessarily putting everything together.
Over the past 4 years, 32-year-old single mother Robin Akbar has been suffering from what doctors believe is asthma. It's so severe that she can't work and is forced to send her 12-year-old son David to live with his father. Now she's received some shocking news. A scan has revealed nodules on her lungs that could be cancer.
I was thinking at that point, how am I going to tell David? What am I going to tell him? What's going to happen to me?
I got really scared that she had cancer because you hear all these stories about people dying from cancer, and it was hard to wrap my mind around what the death of my mother would do to me.
He said, Mom, I don't know. If anything happens to you, I'm just going to go crazy. And I told him, no, you're not. You're going to make it. To myself, I said, okay, I'm going to have to fight for my son's sake. I have the disease, but it's not going to stop me until I take my last breath. I decided to, once again, go back to Dr. Foreman, the same one who had done my sinus surgery.
And we felt it necessary than to get a more firm diagnosis on what was going on in the lungs. We arranged to have her admitted into a pulmonary facility, which did a battery of tests. It was not a cancer. Based on her recent test results, we were able to give Robin the diagnosis of Churg-Strauss syndrome.
Churg-Strauss syndrome, or CSS, is an inflammatory disease that can affect any organ in the body. In healthy individuals, eosinophils, a type of white blood cell, help regulate the body's immune response to allergens. But in patients like Robin, for some unknown reason, the eosinophils proliferate very rapidly, forming clusters in the airway and lungs.
All of these different accumulations of the eosinophils that were then blocking her airways caused her to have a worsening of her breathing potential.
I remember thinking, yes, finally, there is a valid reason for everything that's been taking place in my body.
Dr. Foreman explains that CSS is triggered by common allergic reactions, which appeared in Robin as asthma and sinus problems.
Eosinophils are commonly seen in nasal polyps in people who have allergies. In her particular case, they were probably related to the progression of her disease.
As Robin's asthma and sinus issues got worse, the eosinophils multiplied like wildfire. They began forming small clusters that attacked her organs, starting with the lungs.
Dr. Foreman said the eosinophil begins to multiply rampantly and basically take over and accumulate in different organs of the body in the form of nodules, which was the reason for the nodules in the lungs. And I asked him, okay, is it terminal? Just tell me.
Had Robin's disorder not been diagnosed, her symptoms would have continued. And she also would have seen an inflammation actually of the blood vessels themselves. So essentially, the kidneys could be damaged, the brain could be damaged, the heart could be damaged. Death can then ensue.
Unfortunately, there is no cure for CSS. Luckily for Robin, in some cases, chemotherapy can slow the progression of the disease and send it into remission.
The ultimate treatment goal for Churg-Strauss is to reduce the eosinophil count and reduce inflammation.
As the weeks went by on the treatment, I started to feel better.
Robin's life changed dramatically. She had a hope that was not there before.
I was very excited that things were going to slowly return to normal.
I could just do things that we so often as humans take for granted, the little things, you know.
While she's relieved to be in remission, Robin can't help but wonder why no other doctor was able to put the pieces of the puzzle together.
Churg-Strauss is a difficult disorder to diagnose in its early phases, mainly because the two presenting symptoms of asthma and sinusitis are so prevalent in the general population. Churg-Strauss is a rare syndrome. It is seen in some studies to range from 2.4 to 10 per 1 million people.
With a diagnosis in hand, Robin qualifies for disability.
I was able to slowly start to rebuild my life. I was able to get an apartment and have David come back and live with me again. I got my son back, which was probably the best gift through it all.
Today, Kylie is a happy, healthy 11-year-old and one of 10 siblings.
I like being part of a big family. I like to play outside with my sisters or brothers. I have a dog named Kazoo, and he follows me everywhere and cries if he's not with me.
She loves to jump on the trampoline. She loves to play school. She comes home from school and just plays school. She just has this desire for knowledge.
When I grow up, I want to be a nurse. The nurses were my friends when I was in the hospital. I want to be friends with other people who are sick in the hospital.
She loves what everyone has done for her, and she wants to pay it back. As far as everything she's been through, she is just a positive personality, magnetic. That's the only way to describe it.
I am who I am today because of her. I hope she knows someday how much of an inspiration that she has been, not just for me, but many other people. I tell people all the time, not many people get to meet their heroes. I got to give birth to mine.
My biggest advice to other families would be, don't let one tragedy create another tragedy. And you need to do everything you can to keep going on and moving on for your child as well as each other.
Today, almost a year and a half later, Robin is thriving.
I have breath, and I get one more day to see my son go to school. One more day I get to fight with him because he's running late in the morning. Those are all precious, precious commodities.
I am very proud of my mom because she's been through all this and she hasn't said, I quit. She stuck with it.
I am grateful to my friend Dolores, and I would like to say thank you. To those who are still looking for diagnosis and who have been brushed off and continue to be brushed off and ignored, I would say, don't quit. Don't stop. Even if it means it's to the last breath, refuse to quit.